have the distinct pleasure of introducing incredibly passionate, engaging, and just a wonderful scholar that crosses across so many different fields of interest, not only in geography and GIS, but across multiple disciplines as well, not only here in the US, but around the world. And so it's my distinct pleasure to introduce Dr. Patricia Solis, a research associate professor at Texas Tech University's Department of Geosciences. She's also the co-director of the Geospatial Technology Center. I'm sorry if I butchered the name of that. Patricia is not only a wonderful colleague, she's also been a great mentor to myself. I've had the great privilege of actually meeting and learning with her in a couple different workshops that she's led through National Science Foundation funding and also formally funding when she worked for the Association of American Geographers as well. Patricia has been a great mentor to me, to this work. We've had a lot of great conversations. We've published together in the annals of the AAG, and we're really excited about the future kind of partnerships that we might develop around this work, and also the important work that she's going to be presenting on today that's funded by Usaid and some other sources that's called YouthMappers. And so YouthMappers, as you'll see today, is one of the most incredible mapping efforts I've ever seen, because not only in the data that's being created, that's alone just an incredible feat, but the amount of partnerships and people that are making it happen. People that are not even connected in person, but people are meeting virtually and digitally to come together to a greater cause and a greater vision of what YouthMappers stands for. So we're very excited to be able to welcome Dr. Solis to give this keynote address for our REU work. And we're excited to learn a little bit more about what YouthMappers is all about and how this work is sort of really changing the game of how open data is engaging with scholars and youth and college students around the world. So it's my distinct pleasure to introduce my dear colleague and dear friend, Dr. Patricia Solis.
Thank you so much. You going to help me with the timing?
The floor is yours.
I love this kind of thing, so I could go on and on. If you can give me a little notice, about 10 minutes before you want me to go to questions, I'd really appreciate that. So thank you so much for that really kind introduction. And I have to say that all of you are very privileged to have Dr. Hawthorne as your mentor, and having brought this wonderful, wonderful project into your lives and into being here at UCF. So thank you so much for this invitation, Tim, and also thank you to UCF, and thank you to NSF, and thank you to all of you for your interest in this. I hope to inspire you a little bit today to see how what you're doing and what you've been doing. I've been following this actually since it first started about a year and a half, 2 years ago. So I've been kind of following online your adventures on Facebook, and I've been thinking about this a lot, and I hope to kind of inspire you to see yourself as part of a much bigger community, a sort of movement, as I like to think of it, around the world of young people taking responsibility, stepping up, using science in their communities to make a difference. And I know that's what you've been through, and congratulations, and I hope you can see yourself as part of this community. In fact, some of you already are, and UCF is definitely a partner in this, one of our universities. So with that, I also would like to acknowledge my co-PIs on this project and co-founders, Brent McCusker from West Virginia University, which turns out that Tim and I also have a mutual connection with, and Nuala Cowan at the George Washington University. Chad Blevins is our lead coordinating officer for the work at the Usaid Geo Center. So I want to start off with just a little bit of a challenge for you. Does anybody know what this image is? Any ideas? Does that look like anything to you? No, nobody has a clue. It looks like it was like taken from space. In fact, it was. It's actually the first image taken of planet Earth from outer space. It was on a V-2 rocket in the year 1946. My father was 1 year old, flown up from New Mexico. So not quite a drone, but similar kind of concept, right? Very first time that we did this. Recognize this one? Yeah, it's a little more familiar. This is often referred to as the blue marble. It was the Earth's first selfie, as I like to call it. The first time we had this big picture of all of planet Earth. And it was taken by NASA in Apollo mission, and the year was 1972. I was 1 year old. You kind of recognize this one perhaps if you work on OpenStreetMap. It looks a little bit different than what you're used to seeing, right? You can see the satellite imagery in the background of that. Well, this was the year 2006. My son was a year old. This was the first time that we were able to see this open platform, OpenStreetMap, and to pull imagery up behind it so that we could digitize geographic information from that satellite imagery. So in the course of my connected generations, my father, me, my son, we've gone from, the very first time you see this to everyone having this kind of access at their fingertips. It's really, really incredible. And in fact, if you think that this kind of thing doesn't work with the open data, it is really in the hands of so many people, not just Google, because everyone's very familiar with Google Maps. This is an image of a Google map. Anybody guess where this is? Can you see it well enough to kind of guess? It's in Nepal. This is Kathmandu. But if you wonder if the crowd can create geospatial data, take a look at OpenStreetMap with that same view. So I think this is working, putting this power into the hands of everyone. And my son's generation, your generation, you are the beneficiaries of this. However, there is this really important challenge that is kind of perplexing us, and it's kind of the reason for the initiation of the YouthMappers program. And that is the fact that we do have all of these world global challenges: extreme poverty, vulnerability, environmental issues, chronic food problems, human health issues. But in a lot of places where these issues are the most severe, we don't have a lot of data. How many times have you seen a map like this where, there's gray areas, blank spots on the map, blind spots in our understanding of what's going on? So the absence of data is actually credit for some of the challenges in the science, right? Advances on understanding resilience, reacting to disasters, these kinds of things that we all care about. The lack of data is one of the biggest challenges that we have. It also, on the decision-making side, is one of the biggest challenges that decision makers have towards making progress towards sustainable development goals. So this is the reality that we are kind of looking at. At the same time, there's this opportunity. We know that if you can get ahead of the game and pay attention to events before they happen, development needs before they become too severe, we can actually save a lot of money and a lot of heartache by getting ahead of the game. So USAID estimates that it's nearly $3 to $1 of investment ahead of time. This other opportunity is what I'm just showing you, that geospatial revolution. I call it Geospatial Revolution 2.0 because it's not just the geographic technologies that are becoming more ubiquitous. It's also the combining of those geographic technologies with communication technologies. That's the 2.0 part, where we can work together online, where we can communicate online, and bringing those technologies into interaction with each other is really a major revolution that's really just now happening. As a result of that, there is this mass community of voluntary geographic information mappers, VGI for short. And that other challenge of a world where there are 1.8 billion youth, 85% of them living in developing regions, is also a big opportunity, engaging young people where they live with this revolution and a preemptive kind of approach. So that's the opportunity we saw. This is the idea about how we engage with that, with YouthMappers. The technology that we use is a platform that you are probably familiar with, OpenStreetMap. It is the world's free first editable map. People call it the people's map because anyone can access it and all the data on it is free. It's different from Google Maps, for example, where you can't really just download the data and get it back out what you put into it. So that's the platform that we use. We are organizing young people where they have interest in this kind of technology in the universities, where they're learning often about either these issues or the technologies themselves through geoscience programs, really any program. It's very interdisciplinary. But engaging them through that academic level where we can hopefully, I think we're making progress towards that, institutionalize this as a way of thinking, institutionalize that revolution. And then thanks to our connection with the U.S. Agency for International Development, making that full circle come back to the decision-making process, data to decision. Well, really it's data-driven decision-making. There's a lot of things that happen between that data point and the decision being made, as you all probably really understand after your experiences this summer. But thanks to our work with USAID and the funding that we have from them, this is possible. And in fact, we have a partnership now that we got together in late 2014 and developed this concept and have been working on it. And on GIS Day in November of 2015, we went to Capitol Hill and launched the project in the House of Representatives, and we had received funding from USAID of about $1 million. The original founding universities, as I mentioned, is my university, Texas Tech University, also along with George Washington University, which I still have affiliation with, and West Virginia University. The key component here is the USAID Geo Center. Carrie Stokes is the director. She actually is co-founder of that Geo Center inside of USAID. How many of you know what USAID is and does? A little bit. Agency for International Development. So this is the U.S. federal government's arm for humanitarian assistance and international aid. So if you see a famine somewhere and you see the relief efforts happening, USAID is usually there. You see their logo on the equipment that they have there. I see that in the news. They also work with other kinds of developments, not just disasters, but looking at economic development, well-being, resilience being a really main theme for them. So the Geo Center is actually an entity within USAID that serves all of the different missions. USAID has missions in many different countries inside of the countries in the 100 most poor countries of the world. And so the Geo Center serves those missions with geospatial technology and data, knowing that with whatever it is that the missions are doing, having that kind of information is going to help do their jobs better. They're also just helping the organization as a whole understand where they work and what they work and how efficient they can be. So they believed in this, in fact, driving a lot of this as well. And now, I have to keep changing the slide every time I give this presentation because we opened up the consortium of universities, let's see, it was in the spring of 2016, so about a year and a few months ago. And we now have 72 universities in 24 countries that are part of this network. It's been really crazy. That's about one a week, I can say. So my life has been really busy, I can tell you. But you can see this map here where you can see all over the world where there's young people just like you in the universities wanting to be a part of this, wanting to start this kind of programs. So 16 million plus edits to OpenStreetMap. An edit is any time that you make a change to the map. In that time, we made 16 million edits to the world's free editable map. University of Central Florida has a chapter as well. They were one of our inaugural chapters. I've mentioned the 3 founding chapters, and then we have 24 other universities that joined up right away and said, yes, we want to be a part of this. We're going to be signed up immediately. And UCF is one of those. We're really proud to have that. One of our latest chapters is a college in Belize, actually, in fact. So what do? What do YouthMappers do? I'm going to tell you a few categories, and I'm going to give you a few examples. This is definitely not a complete inventory, but hopefully it will give you kind of an idea of the types of things we do. Oh my goodness, what happened? It just went kind of crazy. It went through several slides at once. Did I touch that? Okay, so here's our list of things that we do. 6 types of projects that we've kind of evolved into doing. One are these featured projects that USAID is really promoting because they're connecting us to those decision makers, and I'll give you a good example of that. Another one is partner initiatives, where there are organizations that are also humanitarian organizations, like Red Cross, like the UN, these kinds of organizations that USAID works with, and we end up lending our efforts to them. Local capacity building, where we invest in certain chapters in certain places where there's a real need, and we could really pull some things together and get that capacity built up. Chapter-led mapping, where the students themselves or their faculty come up with the projects that they want to do locally. And then we have a suite of student scholarships and fellowships and travel participation ways that students can kind of get involved in the network at large. And finally, we're working as a team of PIs on integrating this kind of thing with some of our own research and research on that intersection between research and education, which is really a hallmark of the REU, as you can see. Okay, let's hope it stays. Yeah, okay. So let me give you an example of each one of these. Featured projects. We worked all last year really heavily, it's not the only one we've done, on malaria prevention. It turns out that malaria is humanity's biggest killer. Killed more people than anything else in all of humanity, even war. It's because it's a very old disease, and it hits a lot of people, and endemic to a lot of places. So there is a program called the President's Malaria Initiative that was founded by Bush Jr., and USAID is a part of that effort, and they're using maps to try to figure out where are all the buildings. Why? Because people sleep in them, and that's where the mosquitoes go. So we map the buildings like in the same way that you do an OpenStreetMap, where you get the perimeter, so we understand the number of walls, perhaps, so you can run an algorithm and calculate how much spray you need for that spray campaign, and estimate more or less, what it is that they need for those resources. We held, this is mostly done remotely, like this intersection of geospatial and telecommunications. And I have here a video, I don't know, maybe you'll have to hit it. Where we do these mapathons, where we actually bring the student chapters together, and then they work together, a lot of times simultaneously if we can do it in the, I just want to show you having them wave. We don't have to watch the whole thing. But we like to work with them in multiple places at once, get together, map on the same tasks, and kind of communicate with each other and see what. We got sound too. You'll see. There's one coming up here you're gonna like. Recognize that logo? There you go. So yeah, you can go back. So we have a lot of fun with that. That was just one example. We like to take videos of those kinds of things and meet with each other. But in a more deep level, when we can map in the places where we can connect with those people, we learn more about those issues and more about what goes on when it's endemic to that location. So, and then what happens to the data? It goes through OpenStreetMap, and before we actually build a campaign, our colleagues at the Geo Center make sure that it's going to be used. And in this case, the Peace Corps actually used that data on the ground and validated, and then used it for the President's Malaria Initiative. It turns out that those mosquitoes are really sneaky little things, and you have to cover about 80% of an area before you can say that that was successful, because otherwise you've really wasted your time and your money in that spray. They'll just go some other place. So 80% of it has to be covered. So let's say that this is, the map of a community, 80% would look like this. Well, they made some plans, and when we actually went to map, we found 15% more housing than they had actually planned for originally. So that means that their margin of error really shrunk if they hadn't had that mapping. So if you think that that doesn't make a difference, we think it makes a difference. PMI thought it made a difference. We actually got to go to the White House last year with the previous administration to teach some of the decision makers, how do we do what we do? And the State Department was there, the census was there, YouthMappers was there, and we heard from, this is the admiral who runs the President's Malaria Initiative, and he called out YouthMappers and the other volunteers, and he really recognized that this made an impact on how they did their work. So these big campaigns, it seems like a lot of fun, but aggregated with the crowd can really make a difference. So there's other kinds of partners. This is the second category of work that we do. We partner with the Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team. They're an organization that are really humanitarian mappers, and they create some of the tools that we use, like the hot tasking manager, because when you have so many people working on one area at one time, you really need to have kind of a tool to make sure nobody's mapping over each other. So we use their tool all the time and a lot of their resources. And they actually held a competition for our YouthMappers with this malaria campaign, and we had some students in Ghana just really basically blow everybody away with that. And we have other kinds of partners. If you've ever seen, do you guys do this to your laptops? These stickers? I have some stickers for you. You can put your YouthMapper sticker on your laptop. So we have a lot of partners. That's not all of them, really. Here's most of them right here. I'm not going to talk about all of them, but if you see somebody up there you want to know more about, let me know. We organized many different kinds of efforts to add value to the participation of our YouthMappers, and also to really get engaged with what they're doing on the ground. And so we might have some campaigns with them. One of those examples that we did this last spring was with the South Sudanese refugees in northern Uganda. This has been changing in real time. I mean, they were updating this imagery every couple of weeks, really, because the landscape has been changing. So many people are coming across the border. And Doctors Without Borders and the Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team have put together some tasks, and we've put in a few dedicated chapters to working with this. In Uganda, we have 6 chapters, and they were very heavily involved. And some of us in the U.S. are organizing our students in our classes with student projects. And I did this with one of my classes, and one of the teams, they also created story maps. Everybody loves the story maps as a way to sort of showcase this. And these are, the Bitty Bitty camp was the ones that we mapped, and you can kind of see the type of mapping that happens where the camps are being located. You can imagine that's really important to the humanitarian workers to know where are people coming in, where are they settling, how fast is this changing, and also just where is the border. They need to make sure and stay in Uganda. So we've also done a lot of Skyping with them, the teams in Uganda, to learn more about what is going on there, and communications with the Doctors Without Borders GIS officer there. You can see he wrote this email to my students. Have you ever been someplace and you have no idea what is where? That was a few months ago in Bitty Bitty camp before mapping started. Basically, he just wanted to extend his thanks to the mappers and his gratitude for how that's really helping them in their work day to day. So this kind of thing is really, really important to us, that we can kind of come full circle and make that connection. The third type that I mentioned to you is local capacity building. So our steering committee, we have a little bit of resources that we set aside just to make decisions about where are some of those really great opportunities to put people together locally. And we're now in our second round of this. We've done several on food security, community resilience, hazards, even in Colombia on the peace process there, just whatever the missions, the Usaid missions are working on, and that the chapters that we have there can get engaged in. I just want to talk about one that is really interesting in Kenya with a partner called Map Kibera, and they're working with the Usaid mission there also in Kenya, where the local, with the university students are working, much like you did, with local residents in an informal settlement. In other words, a slum area in the city. This is really important because they need a lot of services and they don't even have addresses, they don't even know, don't have a place mapped. So they're teaching them to map, much like you have done with your communities. And 800,000 map changes just in this one alone. But it's connected to the U.S. Mission and the need for provision of services, so you can see that they're not just doing the features like we do in some of the bigger campaigns, but also some attributes, like where is a hospital, where is a church, where's this clinic, for example, where are ATM services. They were mapping all of these things so that they could understand what was missing from this community. And our students there, they put together a really nice video, if you ever want to look at it, with our website about what they've learned and their experience in learning this. Another one is that we've worked with is in Bangladesh and food security and engaging that crowd. This is a really cool tool if you haven't seen it, to see who's mapping around me. Who's around me is what the tool is called. And so we worked with our chapters in Bangladesh. We have 3 of them. Actually, we have more of them now. And really, part of the idea of this was to make sure that we were including female mappers in all of these efforts. And one of our fellows, I was talking about the fellowship program, Malaria from Bangladesh, has wrote this really beautiful blog about getting engaged. And one of the things that I want to share with this, I think might resonate with you, is this quote that she had: "Envisioning the untraveled world through my mapping makes me feel like the global citizen that I am." So you think of what your work, how that positions you in this broader global movement, and what that means for your generation. I think that was a really nice quote, so I wanted to share that with you. I also mentioned food security in Ghana. I want you to think about this because some of you are either in grad school or going to grad school or thinking about grad school, and you might also be doing an undergraduate thesis. So it's a good opportunity to think about how some of this might connect up with the research that you want to do. We've been connecting with a Usaid fellow at my campus at Texas Tech. He is in the Ag Econ program. He was funded to come to Texas Tech by Usaid, but then from Ghana. But then we started working on this project with Ghana, and he got involved, and we actually helped with the base map for northern Uganda at the same time that he was trying to do his household surveys. So if you can imagine, it really improved his methodology in his dissertation, because instead of going like a snowball sample random from one informant to another, he could take a real true geographic sample because he had a map of the whole area. So that's still actually in work in progress. Here's kind of a view of the kind of maps that we did and things that were missing before. And working with a really, really wonderful group in Ghana as well. They have 300 people in their chapter. It's really amazing. If you ever want to know what, this was a map on the hill with 700 people. I don't know how they did it. It's really a very active, vibrant community. So this round, we're also doing a lot of focus on women and girls. And we have a short campaign that we're calling Let Girls Map. And it's sort of inspired by Michelle Obama's Let Girls Learn initiative, and we've had conversations with them about what kinds of data would be needed for girls and their education and health kinds of issues. So we've been working with students in high schools as well. We have some kinds of advice for chapters how to engage more female mappers in their activities. So we're working on this. We started in March 8th, which was the International Women's Day, and we're going to October 11th, which is International Day of the Girl, and trying to promote this kind of concept and how to get inspired. So you can go to our website to see more. We also have a campaign that's for PEPFAR, which is an AIDS prevention work. It's the Dreams Project is actually what it's called in Africa, for an AIDS-free future, and we have a local project with the Tanzania Development Trust where, and this is Janet Chapman, who is the leader of that, working to end female genital mutilation by mapping the clinics and the places where girls can escape to. And so, a lot of this kind of work is really important, not only to engage women and girls in the mapping itself, but also to focus on issues that are important to women and girls. Okay, takes me to another category of work that we do, which is chapter-led mapping. That's where the ideas come from, people like you, professors, students. There's a lot of local needs. We really encourage that kind of creativity. And I want to just tell you about three really, really quickly that are three different kinds of local engagement in case you want to think of some ideas for your own chapter. One is in Panama. And the University of Panama there, they are staying very, very close to home. They realized on their campus that they have a lot of infrastructure needs. Like it's really difficult if you're disabled to access and get around or even on a bike. And so they wanted to do a very detailed inventory of their campus and do sort of some field mapping in the nearby, so there's a green area nearby their campus. And so I actually got to do a training with them, wonderful group of people. And yeah, so they're making progress on that. Oh, I wanted to say they are also doing street level view with Mapillary, and Mapillary donated some camera mounts for them to be able to do that kind of very local mapping. So it might be kind of familiar to you if any of you use Mapillary. In Nigeria, this is a really interesting project from the Federal University of Technology and Akure there. They noticed that there's a lot of waste just dumped in many different places in the city, and they wanted to see where were those massive dumping, illegal dumping sites, and just sort of analysis about how many people are affected by that. And they need kind of this base map. So we help them. This is some of the things that we can bring to chapters. We help them by helping them getting a task created on an instance of the tasking manager so they can manage a whole bunch of things. We asked a bunch of chapters to help them create this base map data so they can go in and add the local data that we wouldn't know about remotely. And just generally support them through that. Digital Globe Foundation, we also have an MOU with them, so any one of our chapters who are doing this kind of work and they need high resolution imagery because Bing doesn't have very good for where they were mapping, so we got them high resolution imagery behind that task so they could actually do the kind of work that they wanted to do locally. So that's still a work in progress, but they have already won a grant to the Open Data Day mini grant to do this work. So having those kind of resources and making it a viable project got them additional resources, which was really wonderful. If you haven't seen the tasking manager, how many of you have seen the tasking manager before? Yeah. So it looks kind of like this, where you can kind of divide up the whole map. Oops, I did it.
I'll bring you back.
You divide up the whole map in those cells, and you can see that the yellow areas are areas that one mapper has gone through and done a job of mapping. But just like with Wiki, you have other eyes on it. That's the idea of the crowd, right? Then somebody comes through. When it's validated, it turns green. So we know what's been done where, and the passes that we need to make to ensure the quality data have happened. So that's one of the things we can help students set up. Okay, in South Africa, we have a local chapter working also with informal settlements. And they're doing a project to do street addressing because people who live there cannot register to vote if they don't have a street address. And so this is a very interesting local empowerment kind of process that they've decided to take on. The name of the settlement is Alaska. So our bloggers there were joking about Alaska versus Alaska, South Africa, and letting people understand what are some of the differences there with their kind of work. So this is the University of Pretoria, by the way, that chapter. So it's a really interesting example of what you can do looking around your community and using these tools. Okay, so there's many more local things going on. In fact, we don't always know everything about them, but we're trying to compile and put together all of this really great energy and kind of do an inventory of it so people can continue to be inspired like we are. So we also provide, thanks to USAID, we also provide some initiatives that will help students engage across those chapters more than just in the mapping exercises, but mapping with each other. And if you see our tagline, I say a lot, we're not just building maps, we're building mappers. And this is a big part of it. Building that leadership component, getting people to understand that they're a part of a bigger movement, and really getting in coordination with each other. This is really a wonderful opportunity to do that. So we had a leadership fellowship initiative where we did a call across the network for students that wanted, much like the REU, right? Students who wanted to learn more. And we got 20 of those. We picked 20 of those. I think we had more than 100 applications. And we held a workshop in Kathmandu, Nepal, which is very significant. Our collaborators there were Kathmandu Living Labs. And if you remember the 2015 earthquake, this was really the first time that the humanitarian community and a real vibrant mapping community on the ground got ahead of the game. And they started mapping Kathmandu well before, in fact, our George Washington University students were mapping well ahead of the earthquake, so that when the earthquake hit, they already had a pretty good base map. They had somebody on the ground that knew how to map locally. So it was really the seminal moment for the humanitarian community to understand the power of volunteer mapping. And so we got to go back to that moment. And hosted by Kathmandu Living Labs. Here's a picture of our wonderful faces. There were 11 countries represented all across Africa, the Americas, Asia, a couple students from the US as well. And they instantly bonded, and in fact, it's kind of crazy how that happened. They're still working right now actually on ways, we gave them leadership training, and they kind of developed these projects of ways that they think that they can help strengthen that network. So they're working on those ideas right now. We also have a program we call the Virtual Internship, where Nick is one of those virtual interns. It's a really kind of innovative way to get students involved with the USAID Geo Center. But it's expensive to move to Washington, D.C. and to get in there and to be involved at that level. So we work a lot virtually. So here's a virtual internship. You can stay where you are. We don't provide a lot of resources for you, but I think it's a good opportunity to get and see up close what is it like inside the Geo Center, and meet with a lot of different people in that kind of community and learn some new tools as well. So maybe Nick can tell you a little bit more about it if you're interested in doing that internship. They work on special particular projects that maybe require a higher level of experience or validation, so that we make sure and have some more experienced students working on some of the key projects. Let's see. We also have a little grant for students who may be traveling on like an internship or an experience like you all have, if they would also connect up with a local university. I find it really, really important, and of course Dr. Hawthorne agrees with me very much on this front, when the U.S. students do field work, to really connect with your local community and connect with other students there, understand what it's really like there. I think oftentimes researchers might go someplace and not connect with the scholars in that community. It's really difficult to imagine that. So we're promoting that through the State of Scholars. If you're going somewhere to hook up with the university, one of our students was in Indonesia. Two of our students actually were in Indonesia, and they worked with and held a big mapathon at a couple of universities there, you can see. So that's a really good opportunity. This is a really fun picture. They're doing the Texas Tech wave and hitting the group in Indonesia. So we also like to recognize people. So we had several awards in this first year, and I'd like to point out that UCF was actually also a winner of one of those awards for their participation. I believe it was the Female Participation Award. Tim's not here for me to ask him exactly which one that was. But we have all sorts of different categories, and encourage you to kind of look at that chance to be recognized, and also recognize your university, your mentor perhaps, and just encourage you to do those kinds of things. There is also some volunteer roles that we have a lot of need. This is a really big network. I think we don't really know for sure because it keeps changing, but about 4,000 mappers are part of this project. So we have designated a crew that we've trained intensively that we're calling validator crew. So if you have a mapathon, it's nice to have a live validator on site, remotely, just to sort of be checking the work to see you're not replicating mistakes, that there's somebody kind of keeping an eye out for that. So we have a group that is dedicated to doing that. We also are trying to put together a group of ambassadors to welcome all the new people because we're growing so fast, and sort of some peer-to-peer welcoming. And then also coming soon, we are going to be supporting student research creating and using OpenStreetMap data in their own theses or dissertation or master's thesis. So there's all kinds of things that you can do to get involved. That segues a little bit into our integrated research and education kinds of activities. I'm sure as REU students, you've heard a lot about integrating research and education. You've experienced it hands-on. So I don't need to talk to you about how important that really is and what an opportunity that is. But within the context of YouthMappers, it really helps us in many ways. One is by helping with those analyses, by filling in those gaps, but then also having the students understand how that data is used in those kinds of analyses. We are working on pulling together some of those workflow processes and models for how you actually do that. There's so many different ways to use open data and OpenStreetMap data, but having a few good models is really going to be important for students who maybe want to, develop a new methodology or compare methodologies and that kind of thing. So we're really working on that, and working on bringing that and institutionalizing that in our classrooms, especially in the U.S. We have a lot of opportunity to do that, whether that's through introducing a module in your regular GIS course, to doing like what I do at Texas Tech, which is a full-blown, all-out service learning course, team-based, doing these kinds of projects. So there's many different ways of doing that. We're also conducting a study about how people are incorporating this in their curriculum, and trying to find ways that we can do more of that. Something else that interests us is the quality of the work that we do. It's really important that when you put on the end of the edit, you get to put a bunch of hashtags, and we encourage people to put #YouthMappers. We want that to be good quality data. So we're trying to study that process. We provide some training and some resources, point to a lot of resources, and we do so also in our classrooms. But what does that mean for the quality of data, and what does that quality have to do with the uptake of that in decision making? Those are kinds of things that we're really interested in on the development outcomes. Also, how students learn. It's really important to us, again, not just building the maps, but building the mappers. And I'd be curious to hear from all of you in this experience, how does that way of learning help you learn in different ways that maybe you don't learn in a regular kind of classroom environment? Project-based learning is kind of a big theme of that, right? So to recap, we've got these kinds of things, everything from remote, big global campaign, to very, very local, to cross-chapter individuals, all these kinds of ways that YouthMappers are participating, but all with the purpose of creating open data in those blank spots and getting that data used and learning about those places and learning about something and growing the capacity, not just to digitize, but the capacity of mappers around the world in whatever discipline they are. So, but there is challenges to this, and I would be remiss not to acknowledge those kinds of things. It really is very difficult to try to do this at a global level and still try to engage everyone. We want to keep that data quality while we still grow the crowd, but we want to make sure that everybody's doing a really good job. And how do we do that with people from so many different disciplines? You all might have realized, you're a very interdisciplinary group, that it's not always easy to talk across those disciplines. Our chapters are in geoscience departments, sociology departments, and engineering as well. So how do we kind of create that community with that common purpose, even while we're sort of speaking different languages literally and also through our disciplines? And while we're remote and while we spend that time, how do we offer some really critical and meaningful work and learning experiences, both meaningful research and meaningful learning experiences? Because as you know, there's different forms of engagement, different levels of engagement. All of them are valid. And just because you might spend, you don't have to spend 3 years in a place to really understand that place necessarily. Sometimes you can really get something out of even just that remote connection. I've seen it with my own students. Not everybody has the ability to travel, but we do have the ability to connect. And that's not the same thing. So how do we actually make sure that that happens more and more? being conscious of it, I think, is one thing, but you probably have seen in your own experiences. Making those connections are not a function of how much time you spend or what technology you might use to connect. There's something else beyond that, and we want to try to engender more of those kinds of experiences. And we also want to structure this in gender-inclusive ways. As you see, we do have a campaign. I'm very, very aware of this, and I've done a lot of work on that because people come at this through many different experiences, not depending on what country they're coming from, what their gender is, but where are they positioned within that society that they live in, economically, racially, in many different ways of power structures. And as a US-based program, we're also trying to make sure that we don't reinforce colonial kinds of relationships. That's a big challenge. Being aware of it and acknowledging those things, I think, is the very first step in doing it, but we're constantly thinking of ways that we make sure and build up that participation and don't recreate those kinds of issues that are very real in the lives of our participants and in the world. And finally, how are we going to sustain this? This has a lot of energy and a lot of momentum right now, but it is very difficult to sustain these kinds of projects with soft money. That's what we call soft money. When you have grant money, we continually work to infuse resources in something so valuable, and I think that we'll be able to show funders and external investors that this is really worthwhile. But there's no guarantee. How do we actually build this in a way that the energy of the community can sustain itself and grow on its own? So that's a big, big challenge. I think about that a whole lot, and I really encourage you to think about ways that you might take on your work and sustain that. It's not always necessarily in the same form, but how can you bring those things that you learned into the next thing that you do? That's one way of sort of sustaining that investment. So we're thinking about all of those things in that community as well. But that said, a lot of opportunities. I think you felt some of these opportunities, being able to broaden your knowledge and skills. I'm sure that we will see that this afternoon when we see your presentations. The new perspectives that you gain from this kind of thing, whether you get to go somewhere or whether you don't. There's a lot of things to be learned and sort of this deeper understanding of what it means to be a global scientist, what it means to be a global citizen, and enacting on that world, that planet Earth, that blue marble that we all live on together and are trying to make a difference in. So I hope that you enjoyed this, and you can, if you don't have a chapter already on your campus, it's very easy to create one. We try to keep the bar very low for participation. The term is very light so that students with fewer resources can actually participate and try to offer as much as we possibly can, and think about building the mappers and not just the maps. So, thank you. Do you want to do questions?
So yeah, we'll open it up for questions. For any of you on Facebook Live that are watching, please share any comments or questions, and we'll read them off to Dr. Solis. Apologies in advance, there is a slight lag time between the live and video feed, so there's about a minute delay, so we'll get your questions and comments as they come through. So the floor here is open. Please ask away.
I have many questions, but my first question is about, you partner a lot through universities.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any plans or initiatives or thoughts about how to reach beyond universities and into more locally based, like, community initiatives, or is this the focus is on universities for a particular reason?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. We focus on the universities because we believe that the academic community needs to be engaged in that whole effort. There is a humanitarian mapping community in the humanitarian OpenStreetMap community that does work a lot with local NGOs. Missing Maps is also another organization that works with the local communities. And we felt the need to bring in student participation in this. So that's why we're focused on students. You really can't be everything to everybody everywhere, and it's already a little bit overwhelming, to be honest with you. But we do encourage our students to do that work, to reach out and work with their local communities and work out and try to find ways. In fact, one of those leadership projects that I mentioned to you is a set of best practices for exactly how to do that. And so that said, there's also a lot of interest in local high schools. As you can imagine, teachers come to us all the time. We're just not set up with the capacity to be able to do all schools everywhere. It takes a lot more work, I think, at that level, at the high school level. We keep trying to figure out ways that we can do it. For now, we're encouraging our student chapters at the universities and the faculty there to engage with schools in their local areas. There's just a whole nother set of challenges when you're working with secondary schools and NGOs as well. You know, a whole lot different kinds of level of attention that you might need. Universities are much more similar, that we can design these kinds of engagements and they understand each other at a level that maybe could sustain itself. So institutionalization, that's partly what we're looking at as well, right? If you get in the university classroom and you're teaching this kind of effort and it's embedded in these courses, you know, that's a really great way of, you know, keeping that going and getting those resources to continue, like, you know, lab space, for example, mapping, for mapping, you know, that infrastructure already kind of exists. So that's where we're kind of inserting ourselves. But yeah, we definitely encourage people to do that and go beyond just the classroom. I mean, that's a big part of it. So, yeah.
So being that YouthMappers is such a big and global organization, how do you go about connecting to the small, like I see that you have like the community level and you have the global level, and what are the challenges between connecting the two of those?
Yeah, well, we have a listserv. Each chapter has officers, just like a student organization. This was the idea, to have student be kind of the drivers and the leaders of this. And so there is a turnover sometimes, which makes that a little challenging, but really feel like that energy of the students is really critical for making those connections, because they're very motivated, and you know, peer-to-peer is just really an easy way to, you know, get conversations started. So the chapter, that sort of chapter organization, I think helps a lot with that. But we do some structured kinds of things, like I said, the data exchange. When we do the global campaigns, we put it out on our listserv, the listserv of officers of those chapters, and sometimes there'll be some chatter back and forth to say, we're holding a map-a-thon, we have a calendar where people can put up where they're going to do an event, or where they're going to do either local, or they might want somebody to engage on Skype, or sort of invite anybody else who can make the time zone. For one thing, it's difficult with the Philippines, for example, because it's very challenging to get the time zones to line up with some places. You know, there's sort of this organic conversation that people kind of invite each other to. We kind of provide tools to do that and encouragement to do that. The campaigns are also very helpful, especially when you have one of the partners like the humanitarian OpenStreetMap team infuse prizes or something like this, because then people really like to the competition between campuses of, you know, who has the most edits and that kind of stuff. So they really like that a lot. Yes.
I have a question. So how did like this start? You didn't talk too much about like the origin. Like, what was some of the earlier projects you did? And like, I don't know.
Okay. Where did all this come from?
Yeah.
Well, I mentioned to you some of my partners, and it's really kind of an amazing thing. And you might think about this in your own life and your networking, that the people that you meet and that you work with, you might run into them again and again and again. I mean, for example, Dr. Hawthorne and I have done many different kinds of things together. And it is kind of a small world. It's a small community of people who do these kinds of things. And so what happened is that for many years at the Association of American Geographers, I had a lot of funding from USAID and NASA to do global kinds of scholarships at the graduate student level typically, where we'd have workshops on geospatial technologies, not open mapping, but on geospatial technologies. And you know, I was very engaged in that kind of fellowship and scholarship kind of thing. We started it first off in Central America, I think it was 2004, and then we just kept doing really different iterations. And the most recent one that I did, we had a capstone in Washington where we brought students there, and they were on NASA television, and you know, just really impacted Usaid. So when it came around, And I eventually left AAG to start this program, also with funding from USAID. And my partner there is Carrie Stook. She's the director there. She's always believed in that kind of work. And she came to me and said, you know, one of my workers, Chad Levins, he's been really into this open community stuff. And what did you know about this? And so we started putting that together. That piece of the open mapping, you know, there wasn't the academic community involved formally, although students had kind of been engaged, but there was just not a platform for them to, you know, kind of build a community around. They were sort of participating with professionals or, you know, just kind of ad hoc way. They didn't have an identity. And so that's what Chad brought that whole piece into it. And then West Virginia, she said to me, do you know Brent McCusker? And I'm like, of course I've worked with Brent for many years. So this kind of relationships come, let's bring Brent on because he does a lot of the analysis for missions, and he does that sort of research end about vulnerability in many different kinds of missions. So he kind of brings that piece in. And then George Washington University, because they're there in Washington, D.C., they have done a lot of mapathons. Red Cross is right across the street from their campus. And so they started getting engaged. They were one of those people and started incorporating it into their classrooms. So they had the open mapping in the classroom kind of component, and Carrie also asked me something about George Washington University, and I'm like, yes, I have an adjunct status there. So we all kind of knew each other already. We'd worked with each other in sort of different kinds of things, and then there was just this vision to sort of bring together what could we build around this. And so we started off with sort of this session that we held in late 2014, where we all just got around and brainstormed, well, how do we really meet these needs? You know, and Carrie was explaining to us the need for data. And, you know, this is missing. We have so many places that we would like to help and work with. We don't have fundamental data for this. How can we bring all of these pieces together and, you know, really create this network, create this community, and having those camaraderie of experiences before really, I think, fed into something that became very successful, probably I could say overnight, because it's like, you know, in chemistry where you have a super saturated solution and you put the thing in like the crystallizer around. That's what I think happens. There's this latent energy there. There's all of these experiences that kind of fell in around it. And then we took a year and thoughtfully, carefully thought about how to design it. And then once the resources came through, it just really came together. So.
We have a Facebook Live question, first of the day. So this is from Wendy. Thank you, Wendy, for the question. Before I read the question, I do have one request for you since you're watching us here. If you could please share the work of YouthMappers through your Facebook feed, that would be awesome to help support Dr. Solis and her team's work. But anyway, Wendy starts the comment. She says, amazing work. And the question she has is, could you please provide more information on the challenges that you faced, excuse me, collaborating with different universities? Also, what plans are in place to maintain the sustainability of the program?
Right. Thank you, Wendy. I ask myself those questions all the time. The challenges that we face with let me start with the sustainability one. Really is that you know, we're continually trying to write proposals to governments and foundations and you know, anyone that has this kind of interest in development, disaster, and, you know, community engagement. I think you know, the applications are across so many different fields that, you know, there's a real opportunity to try to hit the mark and really get that missing information across a whole number of applications. But it does take a lot of work. I spend a lot of time writing proposals and working with my partners to sort of design ways that we work that can fit their needs. So that's one way, but the other way that we're thinking about sustainability is really by investing in the student-led kind of activities. I think that that's really, really key. It not only helps with the sustaining, but I think it helps a lot with the kind of perspective that we can have and the authenticity that we have. And again, like working with universities, we have been studying how this is being incorporated into classrooms, but we have plans to use that information to sort of promote more universities to actually embed that kind of model in their formal degree pass, whether as an elective or as maybe even a certificate or a major. I think that's one really big long-term goal that we have, is to get more institutions like seeing this as a field or as a subfield in and of itself. I think that's really key. And that brings me to the challenges of working with different universities in many different places. It is challenging because while universities sort of have this structure, they're all about research and education, they are very different in different parts of the world. They have different calendar systems. There are some universities and places that undergo disruption, strikes. We've had plans to do events, and then the university went on strike and we can't do it, for example. There are some real resource constraints in many parts of the world, especially the parts of the world we work in, where internet access is difficult. It's difficult with the labs. Maybe getting access to the labs is challenging. So we do the best we can to try to support the students to get those resources. I think by affiliating with the network and how big it is and how important sounding, I guess, it is to the university, they all of a sudden can pay attention to these students and say, oh, rather than the students just coming and saying, well, we want to do this mapping thing on their own, they can show we are part of a bigger movement. In fact, we ask the students to get the blessing of their university, that they show that they are a student organization of the university just for this purpose, so that we can sort of affirm that and affirm those goals and give them some sort of legitimacy and validation to utilize those resources. So that is somewhat of a challenge. I think that, but for the most part, we haven't done a lot of recruiting. It's really, again, like I said, just the attraction of all of that energy, and this is the way that I can participate. One of our recent blogs was written by one of our fellows in Nicaragua, and she said, I found what my passion is. It's something like that. I found how I can make my impact. This is the sort of mechanism and the route to do that. So that's one way we kind of get around those kinds of problems. It's pure voluntary. We don't require a lot from other people, so we don't add that layer of complexity in working with those universities. We do not request MOUs. That's the one thing that I know. Well, I work a lot in Latin America, and they love memorandum of understandings. They want to work with them. And it's a very time-consuming process to be able to go through those steps. So we decided we don't want to do that. We don't want to have that level of formality. It sort of disempowers the students from feeling like they can act if they have to go through so many different permission levels to get an MOU signed. But we will do it if people want it, but we just don't require that. We just require that the student's organization is validated as a legitimate student organization so that the university recognizes them. So that's one way that we kind of deal with those challenges.
We have another question here. This is from Valentina Steiner. Her question is, I know you guys have done some research about malaria and was wondering if you were doing any other kinds of work about medical geography and mapping.
Sure. Valerie, did you say? What's her name?
Valentina.
Valentina. Hi, Valentina. Yes, actually, the health issues are one of the main things that we see happening in especially a lot of foundations. The Clinton Health Initiative, the Gates Foundation, they're all very, very interested in the public health kind of dimension of mapping. I mean, they kind of, in addition to the disaster mapping or the pre or disaster prevention mapping, the health is probably our second biggest focus. Right now, we have a global campaign that is working with the PEPFAR. It's the President's Emergency Relief Program for AIDS in Africa, and with the idea of mapping hospitals, clinics, those kinds of things, so that it serves to improve service provision and prevention for AIDS in heavily increasing incident areas. So yeah, we work with that. We have plans also to continue our work with the President's Malaria Initiative. I think that's just been a very successful example, very straightforward kind of example about how mapping really, really helps. Let's see. There was another one I was going to say. Well, we asked USAID when the Zika virus was first sort of hit the scene if we could support a campaign on that, but they did not have a request from the mission to look at the Zika virus. But there was a lot of interest in doing that. I don't know if that's going to eventually come about that we can work with stuff like that. But yeah, there's a lot of potential. A lot of our students are also interested in this connection between health and geography.
So one of the challenges that we've experienced in our work is the lag time with the satellite imagery. We have, oftentimes 2006 and maybe 2008. And so flying a drone to collect up-to-date imagery has been a good solution for mapping structures that have been built since then. Are you limited to satellite imagery, or how have you gotten around some of those challenges with malaria and other things where structures that have been built present day are necessary?
Yes, there's two ways, and I presume they can hear you just fine where you are. There's two ways that we, three ways now that we get imagery. In some instances, our chapters might use drones, like in the project in Nigeria that I mentioned, the illegal waste dumping. They are experimenting with drones because they're at a technology university, so they have this kind of capacity to do it. So we should connect, maybe exchange some experiences with the UCF and the mappers, because that would be really kind of interesting to see the different applications of it. But most of the time, there's not that ability. That this is really expensive equipment, and so and this would fall on the universities to do this. We can't provide that equipment for everybody. Imagine, I would love to, and that'd be great. But you're right. The actual imagery data is also kind of a challenge. But with our relationship with Usaid Geo Center, they have a license that's called the Next View license. The federal government can get high resolution satellite imagery of any location that they have a priority for. So any of those global campaigns, if there's not already up-to-date, good existing satellite imagery through Bing or through some other free online source, Mapbox also provides a lot of free imagery. And if we don't get it through that, the Next View license is also a way that we can do it. And if you ever do one of our mapping campaigns, you'll have to check permissions that you will not use this imagery for anything else. And it's not downloadable, it's just behind in the tasking manager that you can see it. Now, on top of that, we recently have signed a memorandum of understanding between YouthMappers and the Digital Globe Foundation, where we can streamline access to limited numbers of satellite imagery through the foundation for projects like that was where we enabled it with the Panama group, the student-led ones, right? Not the USAID ones, and the Nigeria group. So we can get, and this is really good, high-resolution data. It's not as good as you would get from a drone, not 5 centimeters or anything like that, but it's digital globe stuff, recent. And so we're providing access, and they get the actual imagery. They don't, we can put it up behind the Teach tasking manager, but they can also get the actual imagery. So it's a real big benefit to our chapters.
My other question is, have you seen policy come full circle as a result of the YouthMappers efforts?
I wouldn't say that we've been around long enough to do anything about policy per se. Definitely we've heard from the leaders of these kinds of initiatives that they have, it's impacting their operational decision making. In terms of what they end up doing, from a vision standpoint, I don't even know how we would ever get a handle on what that would have been and how you would trace the impact back to the mapping. But I can say that Carrie Stokes at the Usaid Geo Center, she has, with just geospatial technologies in general, not with YouthMappers stuff, but with her work through the Geo Center, has really moved the needle. This is my observation. It's not a scientific study or anything that I can point to, but there have been, she's testified in Congress, some of her maps have been used on the Senate floor, for example. So I think that definitely that kind of technology is making its way into where you can find data-driven policy making. I can't point to YouthMappers having the honor of saying something like that, but I think that the potential is there, and they're noticing.
Have you, are your mappers coordinating the programs that they work with? or not?
And by program, do you mean the software kinds of programs? Or, yeah.
Like
Okay.
ArcMap or
Yeah. Okay. So we typically are using open software, and we rely a lot on the humanitarian OpenStreetMap team for those tools. There's a whole community of hackers in OSM, the OSM community, beyond just the humanitarian community. But they're amazing, amazing people. They just develop this stuff. They typically post the software on GitHub or what have you. Our youth mappers are using the tasking manager that I showed you with the grid. That's where we set our tasks up. And then when you pull that up, you can choose a number of different tools that are embedded behind that. One is called ID Editor, which we really promote using for beginners because it's a very easy interface. It's internet-based. You don't have to download any software. And there's a nice little demo embedded in it, and it's just easy to start working on it. In fact, when we teach beginners, I really think that the challenge in teaching is not in clicking through the geospatial software. It's in the more subtle things like imagery interpretation. Like, what am I looking at on this imagery? Not the software itself, because that's pretty good. So the ID editor is very, very good. You have to have a mouse, and you can do it one by one, right? There's another tool that we use a lot, or we are trying to use more and more. It's called JAWSOM, Java OpenStreetMap tool, which you do have to download something, but then you work offline, which is great for our chapters who, you know, might have a stable, good internet connection. They can still have an event. They just put JAWSOM with the tasks all over their lab, and then they don't have to worry about the internet. And then everything gets uploaded at the end. So that's one way when we do the remote mapping. Those are the two most common used tools with the task manager. But we also have done a lot of field mapping. So there's GoMap, which is, it's OSM based, and that's one of the things that you can actually use on your phone or Android or iPhone. And a number of different things. There's some survey tools that we use if you're going to actually develop your own geospatial survey. But typically they are open source, and they're not necessarily proprietary software. That's really important where we work, because they're not the resources to purchase that software. So, and then in the United States, where we have the blessing of being, you know, having a lot of donated software from proprietary institutions. I mean, it's basically free to educational institutions. It's still, I think, important for our students to learn other tools and be exposed to that. You know, we, for example, at Texas Tech, we would never ever stop teaching ArcMap, but we're introducing other, you know, other kinds of JAWSOM and QGIS and things like this that, you know, I think students should be aware of and kind of get to know. So I think win-win on both ends. I don't really see, you know, I don't really see, one of my big challenges is trying to keep up with those tools myself, but the students they just somehow find these things. They're actually teaching me a lot of times. They're like, have you seen this? No, I haven't seen that. Show me. So it's really a very dynamic kind of ecosystem of tools. But for the most part, ID Editor, JAWSOM, and maybe some field mapping stuff.
So I think that now is a good time to stop for the lunch break. So again, I want to thank Patricia for sharing her insights and for answering the questions for folks here, but also folks online. For those of you watching online, we're going to take a short break. We're going to end the video. And then in 1 hour and 12 minutes at 1 p.m. Eastern Time in the U.S. and 11 a.m. Belize time, we'll be rejoining you with the beginning of the fieldwork presentations from the research done this summer at Hopkins at 1 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Belize will begin with the flooding and disaster management research team. So thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you in about an hour.
Thank you.